let's take a look at some of the first documented murders committed by famous mobsters. I'm James Gladwish and welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today, we're going to take a quick look at the first hits committed by a selection of feared mobsters. Let's start off with one of the most bloodthirsty gangsters in mob history, former Philadelphia crime boss DeMeo, Little Nicky Scarfo. In his early years in the Philly mob in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Nicky Scarfo was mentored by the highly respected and violent gangster Felix Skinny Razor DiTullio. Skinny Razor was famously portrayed in the Martin Scorsese film The Irishman by the excellent Bobby Cannavale. Skinny Razor schooled the young Nicky Scarfo in the art of murder. Scarfo's nephew and underboss Philip Leonetti would later recall what Uncle Nicky had told him about his first murder. And it turned out to be a particularly vicious affair. Leonetti would state, "My uncle's first hit, he did it with Skinny Razor. There was a guy in South Philly who had a fruit stand. They called him the Huckster. The Huckster's brother had a problem with Skinny Razor, and Skinny Razor got the okay to kill him. So him and my uncle went to the guy's store in South Philadelphia. It was during a real bad snowstorm, and the guy let them into the store and they killed him. They stabbed him to death. When they were done, they cut his balls off and put them in the guy's mouth. That's how my uncle learned about killing, from being around Skinny Razor." Some sources state that former Gambino crime family boss John Gotti never personally killed anyone. However, former Bonanno crime family boss turned informant Joseph Massino stated otherwise. Massino had been a friend of John Gotti's, and when Massino turned informant, he told the authorities that John Gotti was the shooter in the hit of Vito Borelli. In Joe Massino's own words, here is some background as to why Vito Borelli was killed. Massino's FBI file states, Massino, he was going out with Paul Castellano's daughter, and he was making a lot of fun at Paul Castellano, and they couldn't get Vito. And Paul Castellano, at that time, we had somebody by the name of Sal Catalano. He was our acting boss in the Bonanno family, and Paul asked him for a favour. He was having a hard time and he wanted Vito to be killed. Question: why was Vito to be killed, just to be clear? Massino: he was making fun of Paul Castellano. The Sal Catalano mentioned was Salvatore Catalano, a Sicilian mobster in the Bonanno crime family, who was acting boss for the imprisoned official boss Philip Rusty Vastelli. Vito Borelli had made fun of Paul Castellano by stating that he looked like chicken magnate Frank Perdue. Massino would continue. Question: who was involved in the murder of Vito Borelli? Massino: me, John Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, Frankie DeCicco, Sonny Black, Bubby, Anthony Rubino, and Salvatore. Question: and who ordered the murder? Massino: Paul Castellano. As you can see, there was a selection of fairly famous mobsters who were involved in this killing. The Bubby mentioned is Bonanno crime family mobster John Bubby Cerasani, and Anthony Rubino is actually Anthony Rubito, another Bonanno family mobster. Massino would continue. Question: what was your role with respect to the murder? Massino: I was just there. Question: what do you mean by that? Massino: I was down the block. Question: the day he was killed? Massino: the day he got murdered. Question: what was John Gotti's role? Massino: he was the shooter. Question: and just to be clear for the record, who was Paul Castellano at the time of this murder? Massino: he was the boss of the Gambino family. Question: and who was John Gotti at this point in time? Massino: at that point, he was an acting captain of the Gambino family. As we can see, Joe Massino is clearly stating that John Gotti was the man who pulled the trigger in the hit on Vito Borelli. If this is true, then it may well be the only documented murder that John Gotti committed with his own hands. I've covered this hit in greater detail in a previous video. The link to this is in the comments below. Gambino family soldier Roy DeMeo is often considered one of the most prolific killers in mob history. Whether the number of deaths attributed to him and his crew is true or not is unknown. But Roy DeMeo was greatly feared. According to the book Murder Machine by Gene Mustaine and Jerry Capisi, Roy DeMeo committed his first murder at the age of 32. Future Gambino crime family captain Nino Gaggi and his then mob associate Roy DeMeo were extorting a man called Paul Rothenberg, who was in the X-rated film business. In 1973, Paul Rothenberg had his film processing lab raided by the police. Nino Gaggi and Roy DeMeo were concerned that Rothenberg would cooperate with the authorities and discuss their extortion scheme. Nino Gaggi decided that Paul Rothenberg had to be killed and ordered Roy DeMeo to carry it out. Roy DeMeo then arranged a meeting with Paul Rothenberg at a diner. It was here that Roy DeMeo would commit his first of many murders. The book Murder Machine states, Roy was more than ready to oblige. The murder would seal his alliance with Nino and put him on the Gambino fast track. So, in Roy's mind, murder, like sex and money, became just a way to show power. At the diner, Roy sat in his car and waited until Rothenberg arrived in his. Getting straight to the task, he ordered Rothenberg out of his car at silence-equipped gunpoint, marched him into an alleyway, and fired 2 bullets into his head with the calm of an executioner. No muss, no fuss, no mistakes, no guilt. For 32-year-old Roy, the murder was an epiphanous moment. He tried explaining it to his young followers. You know something? After you kill someone, anything is possible. Philip Leonetti was the underboss to his uncle, Mafia boss Nicky Scarfo, in the Philadelphia mob. Scarfo had been grooming his nephew in the ways of Cosa Nostra since he was young. In 1976, a man called Louis DeMarco had been robbing the card games belonging to Philadelphia mobster Frank "Chicky" Narducci. Narducci wanted DeMarco killed, and so Bruno crime family underboss Philip Testa called Nicky Scarfo and gave him the order to have DeMarco murdered. Scarfo saw this as the perfect opportunity for his nephew Philip Leonetti to make a name for himself. They tracked DeMarco down to a motel in Atlantic City called the Ensign Motel, and the 23-year-old Leonetti would commit his first murder, alongside a man called Vincent Falcone. As Leonetti describes in his own words in the book Mafia Prince, Louis DeMarco was getting ready to leave his room at the Ensign Motel, and he had no idea what was coming. So we see him walking out, and we run up on him. Me and Vince had masks and gloves on. We were behind him. He never saw us coming. I was the first one to shoot, and I blasted him right in the back of his head. After I shot him, I thought he was running away, but it was the force of the bullet that made him fly forward, and he landed face down. Then me and Vince just emptied our guns into him. I think the first shot killed him. We did it right in the parking lot, right on Pacific Avenue in broad daylight. I remember standing over him and emptying my gun into him. I remember the feeling I had. I felt cold, and I didn't feel any remorse. That's it for part 1. Look out for part 2, where we discuss some further first documented murders by famous mobsters. In the comments below, let me know if you can think of any first documented murders committed by mobsters. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.